All right, here we go with another video. I know it's been a bit. I'm going to apologize for that, but this time I've got a project I've been working on for a long time, actually. So a little while ago, I'm just going to give you a quick history of why I came up with this idea. A little while ago, if you remember, I made a very large mathematical-oriented document explaining how many different possible ways you can create rule sets for playing Smash Ultimate games. And it turns out there's a lot, like a lot. And one of the things that stuck out most to me while working on that project is I realized that a lot of these settings are grossly underused by Smash Bros. Players, either because they're just forgotten about, hard to access, or just sometimes really people don't even know about them. And just combining some of those obscure settings can make for a really fun time, but they're also very underused. And so I thought it'd be so cool if you could have a computer program that essentially generates a random rule set, completely random every time. So you don't have to think about all the, oh, well, what about this weird rule? Oh, there's that one rule. I forgot that's in there. So you don't have to think about that. This will just do it all for you. And so I took a little bit of time, and it took a while to get this working and get all the bugs out and make it look nice. But here is the final product, and I'm ready to show it to you guys today and to publish it online, as with all of my projects, so that you can use it for yourself. So first, the layout of this video, first I'm going to show you what it is, how it works, what it kind of does, all that kind of stuff. Afterwards, I'll show you how the code works. I'll run you through all the lines, give a brief overview of them, and then finally, I will explain how you can use this and get it for yourself. So first of all, this is just a document that you can download. It's just one file, and it loads up just like a web page, but it is a file. Um, and so you open it up, and when you first load it, if you reload this page, it looks just like this. And you've just got all these boxes and this thing at the top. So I'll kind of walk you through how each thing works. You've got the instructions here. They're pretty basic. You just select elements you want to generate. Here you can import settings. So this is the settings for all these checkboxes. So you'll see if I like turn all of these off, we get a bunch of zeros there. And then like if I change this to 8, that one just changed to an 8. So you can copy these settings by clicking this button, and then later when you reload the page, if you paste them in and say import settings, it'll return to all the previous settings that you have. So if you, for example, the default settings say that you have all the DLC, but let's say you haven't purchased those, you can turn that off, copy those settings, and save that string of numbers somewhere else. And then every time you use this document, you can import those so you don't have to go and check all the boxes every time. But for now, let's just stick with the basic settings. So you'll just click Generate Game, and it will generate a rule set based on the things you have selected. So in this case, we got Classic Mode, and we're going to do the Samus Classic Mode with Intensity 1.9. So every time it should be something different. So this time it looks like we're creating a Spirit Team and a Mii Fighter, and then we're doing Spirit Board. So we're going to play Spirit Board with Mii Brawler. So you can change what modes are included. So say you don't want to do spirits or maybe none of the auxiliary modes and you don't want to play online, you can just stick to like the basic Smash. And then here you'll get just the basic Smash Bros. In this case, it looks like we got, oh, just Smash itself. So yeah, you can turn on and off as many as you like. A fun little Easter egg I included is if you turn everything off and try and generate, it'll say, if you're just going to turn everything off, then go play a different game or something. And then here are alternative rules specific to some game modes. So like Squad Strike, these rules only apply to Squad Strike. So you can select those and then Tourney, Smashdown, Super Sudden Death, Online, and so on. So these are settings specifically for these modes. And then these settings over here are, they don't necessarily apply to every mode, but in general, they're applicable to almost every mode. So a lot of the time you'll have to choose between time, stock, or stamina, and then depending on which one is chosen, you can say, oh, I want the program itself to generate how much stamina we have. If you turn these off, it will still tell you to set them. It just won't tell you what to set them as. So to give you an example of that, let's say we only want Smash Bros. And we want nothing to be generated. So then you'll see a lot of the times here it says set it to what you want. So in this case, since we've turned it off, it's not going to choose one for us. Instead, it asks us to choose one. However, that does make things slightly difficult because the program doesn't know what you've chosen, so it doesn't know what options are available later on. So that can cause some issues, but those all should be handled by the computer itself. sometimes it'll just add a little if applicable. Um, so those are the other rules, and then these are just some other settings. You can have up to 8 players because certain modes have certain number of players. I do have it set up so that if you try and generate a game with, for example, um, online co-op can only have 2 players, and if we have it set to 8, we get an error. Well, actually, in this case, we got a lot of errors, but in this case, it says, hey, you can't have online co-op selected because that's only available for 2 players, and you have something other than that selected. Um, and that's why, if you notice, the default settings deselect co-op versus and online co-op because those are not available with 1 player, which is the default. And then these settings apply to certain uh, multi-round things. So, like for example, tourney mode, you have lots of different separate games being played. So if you select choose all stages for me, then every time a new matchup is going to be played, it will tell you which stage to choose. But if you uncheck this, um, or if you uncheck the choose all stages, then it will only select the first stage. But if you deselect choose stages for me, it won't choose any stages at all. And then choose fighters, of course, chooses fighters. And you'll see that that one's linked to this one because you can't say, oh, I want you to choose fighters for me, or I want you to choose all my fighters, but I don't want you to choose fighters because that just doesn't make sense. So you can have choose fighters for me on and this off, but you can't have this off and this on. And then, of course, it lists what DLC you own to know whether to include those as options or not. So just to show you one more time how kind of things work, in this case, we got classic mode with Sheik. Here we got VR mode. So that's another thing you can turn off if you're like, oh, I don't own the Labo VR headset. You can turn that off and save your settings. In this case, we got online, and it'll tell you to play with Zelda. So hopefully you're good with Zelda. And it even has like spectate mode in online. So you can see there's a lot of like really obscure things that most people don't spend a whole lot of time in, just so this can give you kind of an idea. One setting that I feel like really illustrates how well this works is the tourney mode because there are so many different options for tourney. So if we turn on all the options for tourney mode, you'll see our scroll bar over here has gotten really small. That's because we've turned on spirits and we've turned on choose fighters and we've turned on choose all stages. So you'll see it goes through at the beginning and says, okay, you need to create this spirit team and this spirit team and this one. And so it creates a spirit team for every single participant who's going to be playing. You can see we're up to team 14, team 16. I'm not sure, team 20. I don't know how many characters it chose for us, but 29. Okay, so it looks like we got 29 teams. And then look, it's going to create some Mii fighters because some of those people are going to be Mii fighters. And then it says, okay, so now that we've made all the spirit teams and team fighters, we can actually get into the game. So it says, select tourney. We have 29 participants. And since we selected 1 human player, we have 28 of those are CPUs. It chooses layout A. It gives us our entire rule set. Here's the item selection of which ones are on, which ones are off. The random stage selection. This is the layout of which ones are on and off. We have stage morph on for every 5 minutes. And then we choose the characters for every single player. And you can see guest 2 is one of those people who got a sword fighter. And all those spirit teams we created are now being assigned. So you choose a character and a spirit team for everyone. Oh, and it looks like we got a damage handicap as well. So every character starts at a specific percentage. Oh my goodness, guest 12 starting at 200%. That is going to be rough. 300% for these two, that's incredible. And then the CPUs each get a default level to start as. And then you shuffle the lineup and enter the tournament. In this case, it looks like our stage selection did not work because it must have chosen something like automatically choose stages. Yep, stage selection to random. So we don't have to manually select the stages, so it's not going to give us a list of stages to select because the game itself will randomly select them. So that's just kind of the layout of how this works. It just gives you a different option each time based on what you want to play as. So now we're going to go ahead and look through the code. Now, I will warn you, this code is very long. It is 3,600 lines of code, exactly, on the dot. But that's because I've included the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in one. So I'm just going to run this through not line by line because that would take forever, but just block of code by block of code. And give a brief explanation. And of course, if you want to learn more about how it works, then you can download the file for yourself, go through the code, and try and understand every single line, experiment with it, do whatever you like. But in this case, we're just going to go block of code by block of code. So this is just the CSS to start out with. It just defines how the thing is styled. It gives us like the centering and how the buttons look. It's not too complicated. It just gives us the basic styling for the entire thing. And then we've got like the item table and later the stage table. This gives those tables of items and stages their coloring, their layout. Oh, one other thing I want to demonstrate is if you go on here and then you make this smaller. So if we were to make this a mobile phone example, you can see it still looks nice, but it looks different. And that bar will stay with us just like it did on the other one. And everything is lined up vertically instead. And then, of course, with tables, those ones are too big to fit on the page, but you can scroll through them. And so it works just like it would. So that is one benefit of this. So this code right here with the screen width, this is what dictates when you're in mobile mode how to format that. So finally, we're on to the HTML. This is just all fairly basic. It just has the text, the buttons, everything is laid out. There's a lot of it because there are a lot of checkboxes, as you can clearly see at the beginning. There are a lot of text boxes. And then at the very bottom of the input, we have this little div called outputs. And that is where all of that output in text is going to be. And so even though this is just a tiny portion here, that's because using JavaScript, we're going to fill this part of the HTML with more text. So speaking of the JavaScript, we're now going to get into that. And as you can see, the JavaScript is what sets up the majority of this because there's a lot of functionality. So here we just say we're going to start by initializing all the variables, and then we want to check the boxes, which is to default the checkboxes. So the initialize function just sets all these variables to their defaults so that if you've generated a previous one and overwritten some of these variables, they get reset to what they should be. And you can see like I've listed every single spirit in the game and all of the fighters, and the spirits especially took a long time. This is all of them listed out, and it is a long variable list. But yeah, we've just got all the information we need to do math later. So then here's our checkboxes one, which just goes through and says, hey, check that all the correct boxes are checked. And then after that, we're able to go on to do what we want later. So this is a function that checks entire columns. So if we return here, it's basically what these two buttons are going to do. So you can see this button goes through and checks every single one of these boxes. And this is the function that does that. And it works for uncheck as well. This next function, as it says, is for activating the checkbox above if the lower one is activated. So what that means is, for example, if we turn everything off and we say, oh, I want to activate Smash. Well, Smash is a subcategory of the menu of Smash. And so when we activate this one, we want that one to be activated as well. And that can be layered. So Custom Smash is a subcategory of Special Smash, which is a subcategory of just Smash. And so it will activate all the way up. In fact, it will even go down to here. So if you go for like Smash Down, these are subcategories of this. So these will activate that, which will activate that, which will activate that. So this is just a function that does that. And then this is kind of the opposite. This is the opposite, which is to say if we turn off this, if all of these are off, then this one needs to be off as well. Because if you turn this one on and then turn all of these off, it makes no sense to have that one on. And so that's the function that helps with that. This is the function that goes through each box at the beginning and says, hey, I want to make sure all the correct boxes are checked. And then here, these are testing commented out. So they're not going to actually do anything unless you uncomment them. But if you want to set your default to something else, you can uncomment these two lines, these bottom two, and then replace this insert ID here with your settings that you want. So next is to check for any empty subgroups, which is going to utilize this function. So every time you check a box, it's going to run through all these checks and say, hey, are all of the subcategories unchecked? If so, I want you to check the upper one. So now we're going to start getting into the actual main category of generating the everything, like the entire output. So first we need to gather all of the values. So this just goes through each and every checkbox and says, hey, I want you to get whether or not this box is checked. And that's just going to be a true or false. This right here is that's a little bit different for the player count. It just goes through each player count one and says which one of these is checked. And then we just finish off going through all the rest of these. So now we're going to generate an export, which is the settings up in this upper right corner. So this is the function that generates that number. And it basically just goes through each thing and says, hey, if you're true, add a 1. If you're false, add a 0. Or if you're the number, like the player count, which is not a 1 or a 0, it can be a 1 to 8. It says add that number instead. And then this is a small function that just gives this copy button its functionality. So it lets you copy your settings. This is a function to import the settings. So when you copy and paste your settings, it will import those in. Now, this part here goes through and says, hey, once check that this is all part of this import settings. This part here is the part that checks to make sure it's a valid string. So for example, if we go in here and we say like something random and say import that, it'll say those are invalid settings. And that's checked by this. This is the part that actually imports those settings. So after we've done all of that kind of semantic stuff, we want to be able to actually generate a game. And so we do that with this randomize function. So first it initializes it, it generates an export, and it sets our output to blank. So it removes any previous output. Then it goes through and says, hey, let's check what DLC they own. And then this is the part that says, hey, if they turned everything off, give them this alert. And this is the part where it actually starts getting the random stuff. So it says, okay, let's start at the top menu. What in that top menu is available? So is Smash, is Spirits, is Games and More, is Online. So it goes through those 4 options and says, are those available? And then if they are, it adds them to this list, and then it picks a random one out of the list. These here are really quick. These here are the ones that check for impossibilities. So if you have the wrong number of players per mode, this is what checks that. And then it says, okay, now we want to choose one out of that list. And then we say, okay, well, if it's Smash Bros, if it's just the Smash mode, then we're going to do all of this stuff, which is pretty long. It actually goes for like a long, long time. So we'll run through that now, but keep in mind that we're going to have a thing later that says otherwise if it's something else. So in Smash Bros, it just says, hey, select Smash from the menu, and then it says, okay, well, which modes in Smash Bros are available? Pick one of those. And it says, okay, well, if the chosen mode is just Smash Bros, then we want to, so you'll see this structure is used a lot, which says, hey, if this variable is true, meaning if they want us to generate something, then pick a random one from the list and tell them to set that style as that. Otherwise, if they say we don't want to generate one, tell them to pick it themselves, which is this thing. And we basically repeat that for everything. So if stamina is chosen, then we say set it to a random thing. Otherwise, tell them to do what they want. Same with stock, same with time, and on and on. So there are some different ones, but you'll see that this block here is very similar to this block here, which is also very similar to this one here. So it kind of follows that same usage of code. So for items, it's a little bit different because we do the same thing where we say if it's true, we want to do something, and if it's false, tell them to do whatever they want. But if it's true, we say we want to generate this item table, and you'll see that function later at the end of the code. And then it kind of has these extra cases, which is like, oh, if all of the items are off, or if item appearance is none, then don't do that. Otherwise, it's going to display this table, which again, later at the end of the code, we're going to have some extra functions, and I'll show you how pick items works. And then same thing with random stage selection. It will generate us a table of stages if asked to. Stage morph is also a little bit different because we have that first to option, like first to how many wins. And so those are mutually exclusive because they dictate how many stages you're going to be playing on. And so we kind of do this 50-50. Is it going to be stage morph or is it going to be first to? And then we say, okay, if it's stage morph, what I want you to do is I want you to go and figure out based on the time amount, which options are available, and then pick a random one from there. Otherwise, if it's first to, I want you to go pick a random number 1 through 5 of how many, or a number 1 through 5 of how many wins you have to play to. So it's kind of this mutually exclusive, double checking everything kind of code. And then once again, we have that same block of code as before in these, like, I think it's 6 lines. So these 6 lines of code you can see again and again and again. And now we get to the part where we actually choose a stage. And so it goes through and it says, okay, I want to choose this stage. And if you have to choose multiple stages, it will do that. And you can see we track that with this stages to pick variable. Um, and it picks the correct number of stages and makes sure it doesn't have any duplicates. And then it says, okay, once you have those, you're going to create this string, which is called string to push. And it creates a string saying pick this stage, and this stage, or however many you need. And then at the very, very end of all this double checking, it will give us that string and output it. But you can see it also checks all of this with stage morph and the first two. And it says, okay, we really got to make sure we have the right number of stages. And it also deals with if you told them not to generate a stage morph or a first two, it also gives this example of if you need more, choose this, because we don't know how many stages you'll need in that case. So after you've chosen a stage, we go on to CPUs, and it says, okay, if you need to add CPUs and the player count can hold more CPUs, then we're going to add a random number of them. Next after that is to give the CPUs their own individual level. So it just basically follows the same procedure, saying for each CPU we just made, give them a level. And then it also gives everyone an initial damage if chosen damage is equal to on, or chosen damage handicap. Because when chosen damage handicap is set to on rather than auto, it lets you set your damage to a custom amount, which we're also randomizing through this document. And then next, if we're creating spirit teams, it just has everyone given a spirit team. Now, what's cool about this, I'll show you again, it's a function at the end, this spirit team maker. But it's really cool because at the end, it creates these spirit teams in the middle of the generation. But what's really cool is the instructions for making the spirit team are put at the beginning of the instructions. And that's done intentionally so that you don't set up all your rules and then have to go back and make a spirit team. You make the teams first. This section here is for putting people on teams, so like a team fight. And then this chooses which team members are on each team. And that's randomly generated as well. This part is going to assign each player a fighter, and then it says begin the game. And so that's the entirety of the code for Smash Bros. Now for Squad Strike, you're going to see a lot of similarities, so I'll just gloss over those. So we've done the majority of the code now, but there are some differences I'd like to point out. So there's different options for Squad Strike, like Tag Team, Elimination, and Best of. And those settings each have their own custom settings. And so there's a little bit more code in here. You can see a lot of this is similar. There's a little bit more code that says, hey, this setting is only available if this setting is chosen. So for example, Victor's recovery is only possible to be set if you're in elimination. If it's best of or I don't remember what the other one is, but if it's one of the other two options, there's no option to do Victor's recovery. And so you can only do this if the chosen Squad Strike mode is elimination. So once again, everything's pretty similar. You'll recognize the code. This is the stage selection. There's a little bit different here because you choose 3v3 or 5v5, and then you pick fighters for each person. Choose computer levels if it's a computer you're fighting against. You create spirit teams, and that's it. Tourney, again, pretty similar. There's a little bit of difference because you can have up to 32 players in this one, and so it will randomly generate computers for if you have more than that. We go through, it chooses a random layout A, B, or C, or D. Chooses all the rules as per usual. Here's the stage morph options because you can do that in tourney mode. Goes through, chooses a stage just as normal. So that one works pretty similarly. Special Smash is pretty much the exact same. It only has these special rules that are chosen at the beginning. But other than that, you're doing the same thing as every other mode, choosing items, choosing random stage selection, all of that. And so then we get down here to the end where you choose fighters and begin the game. So Smashdown is a little bit different. All the beginning rules are identical, so we're going to skip those. But at the very end, Smashdown is different because it's a multi-round game. So at the very end, instead of after begin the game, that's not the end. What happens afterwards is we say, hey, if that person wants to generate more battles or like more stages for every single battle, then it starts generating these rounds. So it says, here's the setup for round 2 and round 3, and it gives those different options if you've chosen that you want them. So next is super sudden death, which is virtually identical to everything we've done so far. So that one has nothing special. Spirits mode is super basic. Actually, did I skip one? Nope, super sudden death is the last Smash Bros mode. So yeah, that's good. Spirits mode is really, really basic. It's just, hey, select a spirit team, select your number of players, and begin the game. Now, games and more are obviously pretty unique, but they're very short because they don't actually contain a whole lot of code. So you can do VR mode where you select the settings, but there's not a whole lot of settings to choose from. Classic mode is really short because really all it is choosing the number of players and choosing a fighter for each player. Mob Smash is also really short. You basically just choose whether it's Century Smash, All-Star Smash, or Cruel Smash, and then you just choose a stage, but they're all in battlefield form. So you just choose a random stage and fight on it, and then choose a fighter for it as well. Home Run Contest, also pretty basic. You just choose characters to play with, whether it's 1 or 2 players, and that's pretty much it. Online is a little bit more complicated, but not by much. We have the rule sets, but in online mode, you can't choose from most of the rules, so there's just a small amount of different rules. And then there's different instructions for if it's online solo, online co-op, or online tournament. And online spectate is honestly probably the simplest. Literally all you do is choose spectate, select a team to cheer for, and wait for the game to begin. We didn't choose a random team to cheer for because sometimes, I mean, you're supposed to do that based on your judgment of the team. So it doesn't really make sense to randomly choose one where rewards are offered for if you choose a good team. So now here's the interesting part. Once you've generated all that, you're going to say at the end, when you make a me as or like a me fighter as your fighter or spirit team, the way that that works is it says, hey, first I want you to take your what you have now, so all of these instructions, and I want you to attach the me maker instructions at the beginning and then attach the spirit team instructions before that. Because we create this string that says, hey, here's the instructions for how to make your spirit team, but you want those at the very beginning instead of the end. And so this is what puts those at the beginning. So these are really key lines of code here. Um, this is a function I probably use the most throughout it. All it does is it takes in an array and returns a random value from that array. And there's some other auxiliary functions it does depending on if it's a dictionary or an actual array. But either way, that's the essentials of what it does. And this gets used tons throughout the code. Choose fighter basically says pick a random fighter. So it uses this function as well. And it says if it's a me brawler, then I want you to run this create me function. If it's a me sword fighter, do that. And if it's a gunner, choose that. Regardless, all it does is pick a random fighter. So then we're saying, okay, if you want to create a me though, we're going to make these instructions. And so it says, okay, go to games and more, create a me fighter, and here's the instructions. And it will give you a random specials for each of the moves. And then it will say, create this fighter, save it as this number, and return to the main menu. And then we have a similar instruction set for spirit teams. It says, go to these menus, pick a random main spirit, and then pick support spirits until the number of slots is filled, and then return the spirit team as a dictionary. Or I think it might be an array. I don't remember. But that gets returned directly instead of just in this one, we return a string that contains the information for the me. So choose supports is used in that spirit team making, which says, hey, I want to get a random support spirit for this team, but it has to have the correct number of slots. We can't make more than that. Pick items and pick stages are very similar. They just make a table. So we start out with this table, give it the correct classes, and then start out with a table row and a table data that says set all. And then we go through each item and say, randomly choose, is this item on or is it off? And then we end the table as appropriate. And then we return that entire string, which is actually HTML code to create a table. And then the same thing happens with stages. It's virtually identical, but we use the stage list instead of the item list. Finally, we have these functions for teams. So this one will assign all players to a team and double check that they're not on the same team because that's impossible to play with everyone on the same team. And then generating a Smashdown round. This is if you want multiple rounds to be calculated after Smashdown, then this is how you can do that. It will go through each number of rounds that you have and give you basically all the rules as before as needed. And that's pretty much the end. That's all the JavaScript that's included to make everything work. So it is a lot, but that's just because there's so many different options in Super Smash Bros. And ways to play that there's just so much you can do with it, which honestly kind of illustrates why I wanted to make this project in the first place, is because there's just so much you can do with this game. It's incredible. So to end this, I would just like to let everyone know how they can use this for themselves. Check the video description. It's going to have a link to the Google Drive folder, which holds this file. You can just download it and it will run in pretty much any internet browser. I've only tested it in Chrome, so I know it works in Chrome, but I'm pretty sure it will at least function in other browsers. It might look a little bit different, but it should still work exactly the same. I also have all of my other coding projects in that Google Drive folder, so if you want to check those out, go ahead. One other thing, if you haven't looked at that giant math document I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will also attach that in the description because it is absolutely fascinating to see just how many possible games are available in Smash Bros. And not to spoil it, but the number, when you print it out in like Arial 11-point font, takes up more than the width of the page. So it's kind of mind-boggling to think about. Um, so just to recap, we've gone through how this works, the functionality of it. I showed you the responsiveness, so it will even work on mobile if you can get it to run on there. We ran through the code, how all that works, and I talked about how you can get this for yourself. Once again, thank you for watching. Sorry this is a bit longer, but I hope you guys can get some functionality out of this because it is really cool and it took me a long time to throw together. And it is honestly one of my favorite projects to date. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good day.